The Galactic Assembly Hall stretched before them like a cathedral built for gods, towering crystalline spires that pierced the artificial atmosphere, casting prismatic shadows across representatives from 47 different worlds. Here, in the heart of the Nexus Station, civilizations that had never shared the same sky sat in judgment of one another's worth. And in the furthest corner, relegated to the section reserved for probationary species, sat humanity's last diplomatic hope. Ambassador David Harrison adjusted his simple black suit, a stark contrast to the flowing bioluminescent robes and crystalline carapaces surrounding him. At 53, his face bore the weathered lines of someone who had spent too many nights staring at impossible problems, searching for solutions that seemed to retreat further with each passing day. His gray eyes, sharp despite the exhaustion that clung to them like fog, surveyed the assembly with the practiced patience of a man who had learned to swallow his pride in service of his species' survival. 3 years. 3 years since humanity had been granted probationary membership in the Galactic Concord. 3 years of proving they weren't the barbaric deathworlders their reputation suggested. 3 years of Harrison standing in this exact spot, translating humanity's desperate pleas into the measured language of interstellar diplomacy. "The chair recognizes the Zephyrian delegation," announced the assembly's moderator, their voice resonating through the hall with the harmonic undertones that marked their species. Quicks. Thera's 4 eyes fixed on the shimmering representative that rose from the third tier, their gossamer wings catching the light like captured starfire. Vexani, the Zephyrian prime arbiter, spoke with a voice like wind through crystal caves. "Honored assembly, we must address the growing concern regarding the Terran probationary status. Recent intelligence suggests their military capabilities far exceed what was disclosed during their initial application." Harrison's jaw tightened imperceptibly. "Here it comes." Furthermore, Vexdemani continued, their wing patterns shifting to deeper hues of concern. Their refusal to submit complete technological databases raises questions about their commitment to Concord transparency protocols. From the elevated platform reserved for the Hegemony Council, a voice cut through the murmurs like a blade through silk. "The Maltare Hegemony concurs with Zephyrian concerns." High Archonautothis rose from their council seat, their massive form casting shadows across the lower tiers. Standing nearly 8 feet tall, their exoskeleton gleamed with the polished perfection of evolved predators, while their 6 arms moved in the ritualistic gestures that accompanied formal address. The Maltuer had ruled their corner of the galaxy for millennia before humanity had even discovered fire, and they wore their superiority like armor. "We have observed Terran defensive installations that possess energy outputs exceeding those of established Concord members," Nauthis stated, their voice carrying the absolute authority of those born to rule. "Their so-called research stations emit radiation signatures consistent with weapons platforms." Harrison stood slowly, feeling the weight of 47 civilizations' attention settle upon his shoulders. He had navigated these treacherous political waters before, but today felt different. There was something in the air, a tension that went beyond the usual bureaucratic posturing. "Honored moderator," Harrison began, his voice steady despite the storm building in his chest. "Humanity has submitted all required documentation in accordance with Concord Protocol 7 Alpha. Our defensive installations are exactly that, defensive. We have no aggressive intentions toward any Concord member. Yet you refuse to provide complete technical specifications," interjected Kethanili, the crystalline consciousness representative, their faceted form refracting Harrison's image into 1,000 fragments. "This secrecy breeds suspicion among peaceful species." The irony wasn't lost on Harrison. Peaceful species. The same peaceful species that had glassed 3 worlds in the Beta Quadrant rather than allow their populations to be contaminated by contact with non-Concord civilizations. The same peaceful species that maintained orbital bombardment platforms around every inhabited world in their territory, ensuring absolute compliance with their interpretation of galactic law. "Humanity values transparency," Harrison replied carefully. "But we also value the security of our people. Complete technical specifications of our defensive systems would compromise that security." A ripple of agitation spread through the assembly. This was the tightrope Harrison walked daily, appearing cooperative without revealing the true extent of humanity's capabilities. Because if they truly understood what humanity was capable of when pushed to their breaking point, High Archon Nauthis leaned forward, their compound eyes glittering with something that might have been amusement. "Ambassador Harrison, your species demonstrates remarkable audacity. You sit before civilizations that have thrived among the stars for eons, and you speak of security concerns as if you face threats we could not comprehend." The temperature in the hall seemed to drop several degrees. Harrison felt the familiar ice forming in his veins, the cold calculation that had kept him alive during humanity's darker chapters. "Every species faces threats, High Archon," Harrison said quietly. "The wise ones prepare accordingly." Moderator Kuxthera's harmonic voice cut through the growing tension. "The Assembly recognizes Drapuline Representative Jacquemorth." From the mid-tier seats, a creature that looked like living shadow given form rose to address the Assembly. The Dravolans were apex predators on their homeworld, but they had transcended their violent origins millennia ago, or so they claimed. Jacquemorth's speech organs produced sounds like grinding stone, translated by the Assembly's universal systems into words that carried the weight of geological time. "The Dravolan Collective has reviewed Terran military doctrine extensively," Jacquemorth announced, their form shifting like smoke as they spoke. "Their tactical manuals reveal a species that has perfected warfare to an art form. They speak of acceptable losses and tactical sacrifice with a casualness that suggests profound familiarity with organized violence." Harrison's knuckles whitened as his hands gripped the podium. They had stolen classified human military documents, analyzed them, and now presented their findings as evidence of humanity's unfitness for galactic society. "The Collective believes," Jacquemorth continued, "that Terran membership represents an existential threat to the peace that has defined our galaxy for the past 1,000 cycles." This was it. Harrison could feel the mood of the Assembly crystallizing around him like ice forming on a winter lake. 3 years of careful diplomacy, 3 years of swallowing insults and accepting impossible restrictions. And it was all collapsing because humanity's enemies had finally found the ammunition they needed. But Harrison had one card left to play, one desperate gambit that might save his species' place among the stars. "Honored Assembly," he began, his voice carrying across the vast hall with the quiet authority of someone who had stared into the abyss and chosen to speak anyway. "You debate whether humanity deserves membership in your Concord. You analyze our military capabilities, our defensive installations, our preparedness for conflict. But you miss the fundamental truth that should guide this discussion." He paused, letting silence stretch across the Assembly like a held breath. "We are not here because we need you," Harrison said, each word falling into the silence like stones into still water. "We are here because you need us." The reaction was immediate and explosive. Representatives leaped to their feet, their various forms of communication creating a cacophony that the translation system struggled to process. Accusations of arrogance, demands for immediate expulsion, threats that carried the weight of orbital bombardment fleets, all directed at the single human standing calmly at his podium. High Archon Nalthus raised all 6 arms, their gesture calling for silence with the authority of eons. When the Assembly quieted, their voice carried a danger that made the air itself seem to vibrate. "Explain yourself, Ambassador," they commanded. "What possible need could established civilizations have for a species that has barely escaped its gravity well?" Harrison looked out across the Assembly, seeing in their alien faces the same expression he had witnessed in human conflicts throughout history. The moment when diplomacy ended and violence began. But he was humanity's last voice in this chamber, and he would not waste it. "Because," Harrison said quietly, "when the Devourers return, you'll need someone who remembers how to fight." The silence that followed was absolute. Even the ambient systems seemed to pause, as if the station itself held its breath. Then High Archon Nelthus began to laugh, a sound like grinding metal that sent shivers through the crystalline architecture. "The Devourers," they repeated, their voice dripping with millennia of condescension. "Ancient myths, primitive fear. The Concord has evolved beyond such primitive terrors." "Have you?" Harrison asked, his gray eyes meeting the High Archon's compound gaze without flinching. "Because humanity has access to archives that predate the Concord by several thousand years, archives that detail exactly what happened to the civilizations that thought they had evolved beyond primitive terrors." For the first time since the session began, uncertainty flickered across alien faces. The Devourers were legend, ancient enemies that had supposedly swept through the galaxy eons ago, consuming entire civilizations before vanishing into the dark between stars. Most species treated them as cautionary myths, stories told to frighten younglings into obedience. But Harrison's words carried the weight of knowledge, and that knowledge seemed to settle over the assembly like shadow. "You're bluffing," Vextone accused, their wing patterns shifting to aggressive configurations. "Terran archaeological capabilities are limited. You lack the technology to access archives of such antiquity." Harrison smiled, expression that somehow managed to be both sad and terrifying. "You assume we found them on Earth." The implications hit the assembly like a shockwave. If humanity had discovered ancient archives off-world, if they possessed knowledge about galactic history that predated the Concord itself, moderator Kixthara's harmonic voice cut through the growing chaos. "This session is recessed pending investigation of these claims. Ambassador Harrison, you will remain available for questioning." As the assembly began to disperse, Harrison remained at his podium, watching civilizations that had ruled the galaxy for millennia file past him with expressions of confusion and growing alarm. He had played his final card, revealed just enough truth to buy time while keeping humanity's greatest secrets locked away. But as he stood alone in the emptying hall, Harrison couldn't shake the feeling that he had just lit a fuse to an explosive he didn't fully understand. The archives were real, the knowledge they contained was genuine, and the implications would either save humanity's place in the galaxy or condemn them all to extinction. 3 decks below the assembly hall, in a restricted section of Nexus Station accessible only to hegemony security forces, High Archon Nalthus met with their inner circle in chambers that had been swept for surveillance devices every hour for the past 3 years. The meeting room itself was a study in Malalthari aesthetics. Harsh angles and unforgiving surfaces that reflected their species' approach to governance. "The human knows too much," declared War Coordinator Thexamilan, their scarred exoskeleton, bearing the marks of battles fought in the name of galactic order. "This archive claim, if true, represents an unacceptable intelligence advantage." Defense strategist Velanei, their form smaller but no less dangerous than their colleagues, gestured with 4 arms while their secondary speech organs provided harmonic emphasis. Analysis of Terran diplomatic behavior suggests deliberate information management. They have been holding back significant intelligence assets throughout the probationary period. High Archon Nalathis moved to the chamber's tactical display, their gesture activating holographic representations of human territories and known installations. The display showed Earth at the center of an expanding sphere of influence that looked deceptively modest compared to the vast territorial holdings of established Concord members. But appearances, Nalthis was beginning to understand, could be profoundly deceiving when it came to humanity. 3 years, they mused, their voice carrying the weight of someone reviewing a strategic mistake. 3 years of observing their defensive installations, their research stations, their careful compliance with our monitoring protocols. We assumed their compliance indicated weakness. The radiation signatures from their outer system installations, Velnari added, calling up detailed sensor data, initially read as primitive fusion reactors. But recent analysis suggests the signatures might be camouflage. War Coordinator Thexmalan's posture shifted to alert status, an instinctive response that had kept their species alive through eons of galactic politics. "Camouflaged? Ha! If you were to mask the energy signature of an antimatter containment system." Velnari explained, their tactical projections filling the display. Deliberate interference patterns could make it appear as simple fusion technology. The implications hung in the air like incipient violence. Antimatter technology was heavily regulated by the Concord, not because it was inherently dangerous, but because of its potential applications. Civilizations that mastered antimatter could power interstellar vessels capable of devastating entire systems. They could create weapons that turned matter itself into unstoppable force. And humanity apparently had been hiding such capabilities for 3 years. "Recall Fleet Coordinator Jexthal from the Regal Patrol," High Archon Nalthis commanded. "Priority Alpha authorization, full stealth approach to Sol System. I want complete intelligence on actual Terran capabilities." "High Archon," Velnari interjected carefully, "direct reconnaissance of a probationary member's home system violates multiple Concord protocols. Nalthis turned to face their subordinate, their compound eyes reflecting the tactical displays in thousands of fragments. So does concealing military capabilities during probationary evaluation. Ambassador Harrison made a critical error today. He revealed that humanity has been playing a game we didn't know existed. They paused, considering implications that stretched far beyond simple diplomatic maneuvering. And if their claims about ancient archives are accurate. Nalthis continued, humanity may possess strategic intelligence that compromises the foundation of Concord authority. That cannot be permitted. War Coordinator Thexamalan's scarred features shifted into what passed for satisfaction among their species. Eliminate the threat? Not yet, Nalthis replied, their tactical mind already working through the complex calculations required for what they were contemplating. First, we determine the full extent of Terran capabilities. Then we decide whether humanity can properly integrate it into Concord hierarchy, or whether they represent an existential threat requiring permanent resolution. The meeting ended with efficiency typical of Malathari planning. Objectives defined, resources allocated, timelines established. But as his subordinates filed out, High Archon Nalathis remained at the tactical display, studying the modest sphere of human territory with growing unease. In his experience, the most dangerous enemies were those who appeared weak until the moment they revealed their true strength. And today Ambassador Harrison had given him the distinct impression that humanity's true strength remained carefully hidden. 3 days later, Fleet Coordinator Jextil's stealth reconnaissance would provide answers to questions the hegemony should never have asked. But by then, other forces would already be in motion. Forces that would transform Harrison's desperate gambit into the catalyst for events that would reshape the galaxy itself. In his quarters aboard Nexus Station, Ambassador Harrison sat at his desk, reviewing files that officially didn't exist. The secure quantum-encrypted communication array hidden within his diplomatic luggage had received its latest intelligence update from Earth, and the contents made his earlier diplomatic maneuvering seem almost trivial by comparison. The archives were real, the knowledge they contained was staggering, and the implication. Harrison closed the files and moved to his window, looking out at the magnificent vista of space that surrounded Nexus Station. Somewhere among those stars, humanity was conducting research and development programs that would either secure their future among the galactic community or ensure their destruction by that same community. The choice was no longer his to make. Today's session had crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed, revealed tensions that couldn't be smoothed over with diplomatic language. The Maltari would respond. Harrison was certain of that. And when they did, humanity would have to show their true face to the galaxy. He only hoped they were ready for what came next. Fleet Coordinator Jexthul prided themselves on running the most efficient stealth reconnaissance operation in hegemony history. Their ship, the Nalthis, represented the pinnacle of Maltafari engineering, a vessel designed to observe without being observed, to gather intelligence while remaining invisible to even the most sophisticated detection arrays. As they emerged from hyperspace at the edge of the Sol system, Jexthul felt the familiar satisfaction of a perfectly executed approach. The Nalthis hung motionless against the cosmic background, their adaptive camouflage rendering them effectively invisible to any technology the humans might possess. Begin full-spectrum analysis, Jexthul commanded their crew. I want complete intelligence on every installation, every vessel, every energy signature in this system. High Archon Nalthis requires absolute accuracy. Sensor Coordinator Vexi began their sweep, their 8-armed interface with the ship's detection array, allowing for unprecedented precision. Fleet Coordinator, initial readings confirm multiple installations throughout the system. Energy signatures appear consistent with previous intelligence estimates. Appear consistent, Jexthul repeated, their tactical instincts triggering alerts. 3 years of observing human behavior had taught them to question appearances where humanity was concerned. Initiate deep scan protocols. Penetrate any interference patterns. The Nalthis extended specialized sensor arrays designed to pierce through electromagnetic camouflage, analyze subatomic signatures, and detect artificial gravity fields across vast distances. The technology represented centuries of Maltari advancement in surveillance capabilities. What they found should have been impossible. Fleet Coordinator Vaxda reported, their voice carrying undertones of confusion. I'm detecting massive gravitational anomalies throughout the outer system. The readings suggest artificial gravity wells of enormous magnitude. Jexthol moved to the tactical display, their compound eyes processing the flood of data with practiced efficiency. What they saw challenged everything they understood about human technological capabilities. The modest research stations that had appeared in previous scans were revealing their true nature under deep scan analysis. Gravity anchors extending thousands of kilometers into space, energy conduits that could only be designed for weapons that defied conventional physics, and beneath it all a network of connections that suggested, "By the eternal darkness," Jexthal whispered, using an oath reserved for the most profound moments of shock. "They've militarized their entire solar system." The display showed the truth that humanity had hidden for 3 years. Earth wasn't just defended, it was transformed into a weapon platform that could project devastating force across interstellar distances. The energy readings alone suggested power generation capabilities that rivaled the combined output of the entire hegemony fleet. "Fleet Coordinator," Vexdeep continued, their voice now carrying distinct notes of alarm. "The gravitational manipulation technology, the energy outputs, these signatures are consistent with theoretical weapons platforms described in the ancient archives." Ancient archives. Jexthal felt ice crystallizing in their circulatory system. The Multari maintained their own classified archives, records of civilizations that had possessed technologies beyond current understanding, technologies that had supposedly been lost when those civilizations vanished without trace. But if humanity had somehow recovered that knowledge— "Continue scanning," Jexthal ordered, their tactical mind already calculating implications that stretched far beyond simple reconnaissance. "I want complete analysis of their capabilities. Every installation, every weapon system, every—" The alert klaxons cut through their words like blades through flesh. "Fleet Coordinator," Vexdeep's voice carried panic that violated every protocol of Multari military discipline. "I'm detecting massive energy spikes throughout the system. Multiple installations are activating." On the tactical display, the modest human research stations began to reveal their true nature. Gravitational lenses focused energy across impossible distances. Antimatter conduits that shouldn't exist within known physics powered weapons that existed only in theoretical mathematics. And from Earth itself, something was rising. Something that registered on their sensors as a coherent gravitational field moving at significant fraction of light speed. "Impossible," Jexthal breathed. "They couldn't have detected us. Our stealth technology is absolute." But even as they spoke, they knew they were wrong. Because the energy signatures climbing from Earth weren't searching for an invisible ship. They were targeting their exact position with precision that suggested perfect knowledge of their location. "Fleet Coordinator," the spy reported, their voice now carrying the flat calm of someone facing imminent death. "Incoming transmission. Source Earth. It's directed specifically at us." The communication that arrived carried the voice of Ambassador Harrison, but stripped of all diplomatic courtesy. This was humanity without the mask they had worn for 3 years of careful negotiation. "Fleet Coordinator Jexthal of the Multari vessel Naltathasos." Harrison's voice filled their bridge with quiet authority. "You are trespassing in Sol system space without authorization. This constitutes an act of war under the mutual defense provisions of your own Concord Charter." Jexthal's tactical mind struggled to process what they were hearing. The humans knew their ship's name, their commander's identity, their precise location despite stealth technology that should have rendered them invisible. But more than that, Harrison's words carried the weight of someone who understood galactic law better than they had realized. "You have 30 seconds to respond," Harrison continued, "or this conversation ends in a manner that will require significant cleanup." "Cleanup?" Jexthal looked at their tactical display, seeing energy readings that suggested the humans could vaporize their ship without particular effort. But protocol demanded specific responses to direct challenges, and their training overrode their growing terror. "This is Fleet Coordinator Jexthal," they transmitted, their voice steady despite the circumstances. "The Naltathasos is conducting routine patrol operations in open space, in accordance with hegemony territorial rights." The pause that followed seemed to stretch across geological time. "Fleet Coordinator," Harrison replied, and now his voice carried something that made hardened Malturi warriors step back from their stations. You just lied to someone who has spent 3 years learning to recognize when galactic citizens aren't being truthful. Sol system is 13 light-years beyond any hegemony territorial claim, and your ship carries stealth modifications specifically designed for covert reconnaissance. Another pause. When Harrison spoke again, his words carried implications that would echo across the galaxy. More importantly, you're about to learn why humanity wasn't entirely honest about our defensive capabilities. The tactical display exploded with new information as sensors that had remained hidden throughout the reconnaissance began broadcasting their true nature. The Sol system wasn't just defended, it was armed with weapons that operated on principles the Maltese science could barely comprehend, and all of them were targeting the Neolithicos. Fleet Coordinator, Vexed Sihe, whispered, their voice breaking every protocol of military communication. We need to leave, now. But Jexthaled was staring at readings that suggested humanity possessed technologies that predated the Concord by millennia. Technologies that could only have come from one source: the lost archives of civilizations that had vanished from the galaxy eons ago. Prepare emergency hyperspace jump, they commanded, their tactical training finally overriding their shock. All priority to escape vector. The Naltesisos began its emergency departure sequence, their hyperspace drive charging with desperate speed. But as they initiated their jump, Fleet Coordinator Jexthal made a decision that would haunt them for the rest of their brief remaining existence. Instead of fleeing directly to hegemony space, they activated their ship's deep-range quantum communication array and transmitted everything they had discovered to High Archon Nelthis. Every energy reading, every weapons signature, every impossible technology that humanity had hidden within their modest solar system. It was their duty as reconnaissance coordinator to ensure their intelligence reached hegemony command. It was also the action that would transform a minor diplomatic crisis into a war that would reshape the galaxy. The transmission completed just as their hyperspace jump engaged, carrying the Nalthisos away from Soli's system and toward a conversation that would end with orders for humanity's immediate and complete destruction. But in the few seconds before hyperspace claimed their ship, Jexthal glimpsed something on their sensors that would terrorize their dreams for what little time remained to them. From Earth, a single vessel was rising through the atmosphere. A ship that registered on their sensors as incorporating technologies that violated the known laws of physics. A vessel that seemed to be following their hyperspace trajectory with impossible precision, and painted on its hull in letters large enough to be seen across interstellar distances were words in the ancient script that had appeared in the oldest Maltari archives. Remember the Devourers. At Nexus Station, Ambassador Harrison stood in his quarters, watching the real-time tactical feed from Soli's system, with the grim satisfaction of someone who had finally dropped a mask that had become too heavy to bear. The reconnaissance had proceeded exactly as humanity's intelligence services had predicted. The Maltefari had been allowed to discover precisely what humanity wanted them to discover, enough truth to terrify them, while keeping their most devastating capabilities hidden, because what Fleet Coordinator Jexithul had witnessed was only the beginning. Harrison activated his quantum communication array and opened a channel to Earth Command. This is Harrison. Operation Broken Mirror is complete. They've taken the bait. Confirmed, Ambassador, came the reply from Director Catherine Mills, humanity's Chief of Strategic Operations. Fleet Coordinator Jexthu transmitted full reconnaissance data to Hegemony Command 30 seconds ago. Their response is precisely what we modeled. Harrison nodded, feeling the weight of inevitability settling around him like armor. How long before they act? Intelligence suggests 12 hours before High Archon Nauthis assembles their response fleet. 18 hours before they're in position to act on their intentions. 18 hours. Harrison looked out at the magnificent vista of Nexus Station, knowing he was seeing it for the last time as a free representative of humanity. When the Maltori made their move, his role as ambassador would end. His role as humanity's final voice to the galaxy would begin. Director, Harrison said quietly, are we ready? The pause that followed carried the weight of decisions made by an entire species, choices that would either elevate humanity to their rightful place among the stars or condemn them to extinction. Ambassador, Director Mills replied, her voice carrying the steel resolve that had seen humanity through their darkest chapters. We've been ready for 3 years. The question is whether the galaxy is ready for us." Harrison smiled, an expression that no longer carried any pretense of diplomatic courtesy. "I suppose we're about to find out." He closed the communication and began preparing for what would either be the greatest diplomatic triumph in human history or the final conversation of his life. Either way, the mask was off, and tomorrow the galaxy would discover what humanity looked like when they stopped pretending to be anything other than what they were. The last species that remembered how to fight a war they couldn't afford to lose. 14 hours later, High Archon Nalthis stood aboard the bridge of their flagship, the Dominion Eternal, reviewing intelligence data that challenged everything they thought they understood about galactic power structures. The Information Fleet Coordinator Jexthal had died to obtain painted a picture of human capabilities that bordered on the impossible. Technologies that suggested access to knowledge from the galaxy's ancient past. Weapons that operated on principles that violated known physics, defensive installations that could project devastating force across interstellar distances, and underlying it all, the growing certainty that humanity had been playing a game the Multivi didn't know existed. War Coordinator Thaxamalan Nalanthis commanded, their voice carrying the absolute authority of someone who had decided to solve a problem permanently. Status of the fleet: 16 vessels of the line, fully armed and ready for deployment, Nexemlan reported with satisfaction. More than sufficient to reduce the solar system to constituent atoms. Nalthis studied the tactical display showing their assembled fleet, the combined might of Maltari naval supremacy positioned to eliminate what they now understood to be an existential threat to galactic order. 16 ships carrying enough firepower to sterilize entire star systems. It should have been sufficient. But the intelligence from Sol's system suggested that determining what constituted sufficient force when dealing with humanity was more complex than they had realized. Defense strategist Valnari Nalatis continued. Analysis of human defensive capabilities. Velinari's four-armed interface with the tactical systems provided a comprehensive threat assessment that should have been reassuring. Instead, it only deepened their concerns about what they were attempting. Theoretical analysis suggests the installation's fleet coordinator Jexthal detected could engage our fleet at maximum range, Belnari reported. However, the energy signatures indicate technologies that exceed our modeling capabilities. Accurate threat assessment is challenging. In Malthari military terminology, that was equivalent to admitting complete ignorance about what they were facing. But High Archon Nalatis had not maintained hegemony supremacy for 3 centuries by allowing uncertainty to prevent necessary action. Humanity represented a threat to the galactic order that had served the Multali so well. That threat would be eliminated. Initiate final approach to Sol's system, they commanded. All vessels maintain formation. When we drop from hyperspace, I want immediate coordinated bombardment of all human installations. High Archon, War Coordinator Thexmalan interjected carefully. What of Ambassador Harrison? He remains on Nexus Station under diplomatic protection. Nalthis considered the question with the cold calculation that had made them the most feared military commander in hegemony history. Harrison represented more than just humanity's diplomatic voice. He was the architect of whatever game humanity had been playing for 3 years. Send a message to Nexus Station, they decided. Inform Ambassador Harrison that his species' deception has been discovered. He has one opportunity to negotiate humanity's surrender. If he refuses, they paused, looking out at their assembled fleet with the satisfaction of someone who held absolute power. Nexus Station's security systems will experience an unfortunate malfunction. The message was transmitted with efficiency typical of Maltari communications, direct, unambiguous, and carrying the weight of overwhelming force. Harrison would understand exactly what he faced. Surrender humanity to hegemony authority, or watch his diplomatic mission end in violence that would eliminate any possibility of future negotiation. As the fleet entered hyperspace for their final approach to Sol's system, High Archon Nalthis felt the familiar satisfaction of a perfectly planned military operation. Humanity had revealed capabilities that demanded response. That response would be swift, decisive, and absolute. They would never again underestimate the importance of maintaining galactic order. But as the Dominion Eternal jumped toward humanity's home system, carrying orders for their complete destruction, High Archon Nalthis made a critical error in judgment that would soon become apparent to them. They assumed humanity had revealed all their capabilities to Fleet Coordinator Jexthal. They were about to learn that humanity's greatest strength had always been their willingness to sacrifice everything for the survival of their species. And tomorrow, when their fleet arrived at Solar System, they would discover what that willingness looked like when transformed into weapons that operated beyond the boundaries of known physics. Ambassador Harrison received the Multari ultimatum while standing in the observation deck of Nexus Station, watching the stars with the quiet contemplation of someone who understood they were seeing them for the last time as a representative of galactic diplomacy. The message was exactly what humanity's strategic planners had predicted: direct threats, backed by overwhelming force, delivered with the absolute confidence of those who had never faced an enemy, willing to sacrifice everything for victory. Harrison smiled as he read High Archon Nalthus's terms for humanity's surrender: complete technological disclosure, submission to hegemony authority, relocation of human populations to appropriate worlds under Concord supervision. Everything humanity had fought against for the 3 years of their probationary membership. He activated his personal communication device and sent a single word to Earth Command, now. Across the galaxy, in installations hidden throughout human space, weapons that had been constructed in absolute secrecy for the past 3 years began their final activation sequence. Technologies recovered from ancient archives, refined through human engineering, and powered by humanity's willingness to risk everything on a single desperate gambit. The Multari fleet would arrive at Sol System in 6 hours, expecting to find a species hiding behind defensive installations while pleading for mercy. Instead, they would find humanity's true answer to those who threatened their existence. And 3 days later, when Ambassador Harrison died screaming in the wreckage of Nexus Station, his last words would trigger events that would turn the lights out on Multari civilization forever. But for now, Harrison stood quietly in the observation deck, watching the stars and waiting for the galaxy to discover what humanity looked like when they stopped pretending to be civilized. The Dominion Eternal dropped from hyperspace at the edge of Solar System, with the precision that marked 3 centuries of Multari naval supremacy. Around them, 15 additional vessels of the line materialized from the dimensional fold, their combined firepower representing the accumulated might of an empire that had ruled their corner of the galaxy since before humanity discovered agriculture. High Archon Nalthus stood on their flagship's bridge, studying tactical displays that should have shown a cornered species preparing for their final futile resistance. Instead, they found something that challenged every assumption they had made about human nature. Our system was empty. War Coordinator, Nalthus demanded, their voice carrying undertones of confusion that violated every protocol of Multashiri Command Authority. Where are their defensive installations? Vesimulan's scarred features contorted as they processed sensor data that contradicted everything Fleet Coordinator Jexthal had died to obtain. High Archon, I'm detecting no energy signatures consistent with the reconnaissance data. The installations that were documented appear to have been dismantled. Dismantled. Nalthus felt uncertainty crystallizing in their tactical mind, an emotion they hadn't experienced since their early campaigns against primitive civilizations that didn't understand the futility of resistance. Expand the search, they commanded. Full spectrum analysis of the entire system. The humans cannot have simply vanished. But as their fleet's combined sensor arrays swept through Solar System, the impossible became undeniable. The massive installations that had terrified Fleet Coordinator Jexthal were gone. The energy signatures that had suggested weapons capable of interstellar destruction had simply stopped. Earth itself appeared unchanged, a blue-green world orbiting its modest yellow star with the peaceful regularity of a system that had never known war. No orbital platforms, no gravity anchors, no indication that this had ever been anything other than the home world of a species that had barely achieved interstellar flight. Defense strategist Velnari, Nalthus continued, their voice now carrying the dangerous calm that preceded Multari fury, analysis of this situation. Velnari's four-armed interface with the tactical systems provided readings that should have been reassuring. Instead, they only deepened the mystery that was beginning to consume their understanding of what they faced. High Archon, either Fleet Coordinator Jexthal fabricated their entire reconnaissance report, Velnari reported with careful precision, or humanity has technologies that allow them to conceal installations of planetary magnitude with perfect efficiency. Neither option was acceptable. Drextula had been a decorated officer whose reliability was absolute, but technologies that could hide planet-scale installations violated known physics so fundamentally that accepting their existence would require rebuilding their understanding of what was possible. "Incoming transmission," announced Communications Coordinator Hexmani. "Source Earth, broadcasting on open frequencies." The signal that reached them carried Ambassador Harrison's voice, but transmitted from his homeworld rather than Nexus station. When his words filled their bridge, they carried implications that sent ice crystallizing through Molithari's circulatory systems. "High Archon Naltes," Harrison began, his voice now stripped of all diplomatic pretense. "Welcome to Sol System. I trust you'll find our accommodations illuminating." Nalthis activated their response array, their tactical mind already calculating advantages in what had become a conversation rather than the simple destruction they had planned. "Ambassador Harrison," they replied, allowing their voice to carry the full weight of Molteri authority, "your deception has been exposed. Surrender your species to hegemony authority, and we will ensure your people receive appropriate accommodation within Concord hierarchy." The pause that followed seemed to stretch across interstellar distances. "High Archon," Harrison replied, and now his voice carried something that made veteran Moltari warriors step back from their stations. "You just made the same mistake that 47 previous civilizations made when they assumed humanity could be intimidated into surrender." 47 civilizations. Nalthis felt their tactical awareness sharpening to combat focus. Harrison wasn't speaking in hypotheticals. He was referencing specific historical events that predated Molthari historical records. "Explain yourself," Nalthis demanded. "The installations your reconnaissance officer detected," Harrison continued with the patient tone of someone explaining obvious facts to particularly slow students, "were never defensive platforms. They were construction equipment." Construction equipment. The words hit their bridge like antimatter detonations. "For the past 3 years," Harrison explained, "while you observed our primitive activities and debated our fitness for galactic society, humanity has been building something that hasn't existed in this galaxy for approximately 12,000 years. 12,000 years. Howie Nalthis felt the weight of implications that stretched back to the earliest Molteri historical records, to legends of civilizations that had possessed technologies beyond current understanding. "You're referring to the Devourers," Nalthis stated, their voice now carrying undertones of concern that violated every protocol of command authority. "I'm referring to what the Devourers used," Harrison corrected. "The technology they wielded when they swept through this galaxy, consuming civilizations that thought they were too advanced to be threatened by primitive enemies." The tactical display began registering new contacts, energy signatures rising from Earth that defied every known law of physics. Not the massive installations they had expected, but something far more terrifying. A single vessel climbing through Earth's atmosphere with readings that suggested it contained the concentrated power of a dozen star systems. "The difference," Harrison continued, his voice now carrying the weight of absolute authority, "is that the Devourers used that technology to consume civilizations. Humanity has decided to use it to preserve them." The vessel clearing Earth's atmosphere was unlike anything in Molteri experience. Its hull seemed to bend space around it, creating gravitational effects that their sensors could detect but not explain. Energy patterns flowed across its surface in configurations that suggested principles of physics that existed beyond their understanding. And painted on its hull in letters that burned with their own light was a single word in the ancient script that appeared in the oldest galactic archives: Testament. "High Archon Nalthis," Harrison's voice continued as the impossible ship oriented toward their fleet. "You are ordered to withdraw from Soli's system immediately. This is humanity's final diplomatic communication." Nalthis stared at readings that suggested the single human vessel carried more destructive potential than their entire fleet combined. But 3 centuries of Moltefari supremacy could not be abandoned because of impossible sensor readings and archaeological references. "All vessels," they commanded, their voice carrying the absolute authority of someone who had decided to solve an unacceptable problem through overwhelming force, coordinated bombardment. "Target the human vessel. Fire when ready." 16 Molteri ships of the line opened fire simultaneously. Energy weapons that could crack planetary crusts, kinetic projectiles that could shatter asteroids, exotic matter warheads that could destabilize local space-time. The combined barrage represented the concentrated might of an empire that had conquered star systems. The human vessel Testament absorbed their attack without apparent effort. Not deflected, not damaged. Absorbed as if their weapons had been converted into energy that fed something vast and hungry within the ship's impossible hull. "War, Coordinator," Nalthus demanded, their voice now carrying genuine alarm. "Effective bombardment?" Texemelan's response violated every protocol of military reporting they had ever learned. "High Archon, our weapons appear to have made their ships stronger." Stronger. Nalthus watched their tactical display as the human vessel began to emit energy signatures that climbed beyond their instruments' ability to measure. Whatever technology humanity had recovered from ancient archives, it operated on principles that turned conventional attacks into additional power sources. "Incoming transmission from Nexus Station," Communications Coordinator Hexmani reported, their voice carrying undertones of panic that should never have appeared on a Maltari military bridge. The signal carried Ambassador Harrison's image, but broadcast from the diplomatic quarters they had threatened just hours earlier. When he spoke, his words carried the weight of finality that marked the end of civilizations. "High Archon," Harrison said with the quiet courtesy he had maintained throughout 3 years of diplomatic humiliation, "you just fired on a human vessel in our territorial space. Under the mutual defense provisions of your own Concord Charter, this constitutes an act of war." Act of war. The legal terminology should have been meaningless. The Maltare had written most of galactic law to serve their own interests. But Harrison's words carried implications that stretched beyond simple legal interpretation. Furthermore, Harrison continued, his image maintaining perfect diplomatic composure while sensor readings showed his species' impossible vessel charging weapons that operated beyond known physics. "You have now demonstrated that peaceful coexistence between humanity and the current galactic order is unlikely." Unlikely. Nalthus felt the weight of strategic miscalculations settling around them like inevitable gravity. They had assumed humanity's diplomatic behavior indicated weakness. Instead, it had been humanity gathering information about galactic capabilities while concealing their own. "This is humanity's final diplomatic communication," Harrison concluded, his voice carrying the authority of someone speaking for an entire species. "We hereby withdraw from all Concord treaties, reject all hegemony authority, and claim our rightful place as the inheritors of technologies that predate your civilizations by millennia." The transmission ended, leaving Nalthus staring at tactical displays that suggested they had just triggered a war against enemies they didn't understand, using weapons they couldn't comprehend, for reasons that were becoming increasingly unclear. "High Archon," defense strategist Velnari reported, their voice carrying the flat calm of someone reporting inevitable disaster. "The human vessel is targeting our formation. Energy readings suggest." They paused, their four-armed interface with the tactical systems providing data that challenged their understanding of what was possible, "suggest weapon capabilities that exceed theoretical maximums by several orders of magnitude." Several orders of magnitude. Nalthus realized they were facing technologies that didn't just exceed Maltari capabilities, they operated in realms of physics that their science couldn't even model. But High Archon Nalthus had not maintained galactic supremacy for 3 centuries by allowing impossible circumstances to prevent necessary action. Whatever humanity had become, they represented a challenge to Maltari authority that demanded absolute response. "All vessels," they commanded, their voice carrying the steel resolve that had seen their species through every crisis they had faced. "Emergency withdrawal, initiate hyperspace jump immediately." "High Archon," War Coordinator Texemelan objected, their scarred features contorting with confusion. "We outnumber them 16-1. "Numbers," Nalthus replied grimly, "become irrelevant when facing weapons that turn our attacks into additional power sources." The Maltari fleet began their emergency withdrawal, their hyperspace drives charging with desperate efficiency. But as they initiated their jump, High Archon Naltaris made one final decision that would ensure the conflict they had started would not end with their escape. They activated their ship's deep-range quantum communication array and transmitted full tactical data to every Maltari installation in the galaxy, complete intelligence on humanity's impossible capabilities, along with orders for their immediate and total destruction. If they could not defeat humanity with conventional force, they would mobilize every resource their empire possessed for a war of extinction that would end with either Maltese supremacy or galactic devastation. The transmission completed just as their hyperspace jump engaged, carrying their fleet away from solar system and toward conversations that would transform a local conflict into a galaxy-spanning war. But in the few seconds before hyperspace claimed their ship, Nalthis glimpsed something on their sensors that would haunt their remaining existence. The human vessel Testament was not pursuing their fleeing fleet. Instead, it was orienting toward open space, toward trajectories that led to Multiterra territory with precision that suggested perfect knowledge of every hegemony installation in the galaxy. And across its hull, new symbols were appearing in the ancient script that had marked the rise and fall of countless civilizations. Remember the Devourers. Remember what they forgot. At Nexus Station, Ambassador Harrison stood in his diplomatic quarters, watching real-time tactical feeds from Sol System, with the grim satisfaction of someone who had finally revealed humanity's true nature to the galaxy. The Multari fleet's retreat proceeded exactly as humanity's strategic planners had predicted. Desperate withdrawal accompanied by intelligence dissemination that would ensure the conflict escalated beyond any possibility of peaceful resolution. Harrison activated his personal communication array and opened a channel to Earth Command. "This is Harrison. The die is cast. Nalthis has transmitted full tactical intelligence to Hegemony Command." "Confirmed, Ambassador," came Director Mills' reply, her voice carrying the steel resolve that had guided humanity through 3 years of careful preparation. "How long before they mobilize their full response?" Harrison consulted displays showing the network of multi-area communications spreading across the galaxy like virus transmission patterns. "Intelligence suggests 48 hours before they can coordinate a galaxy-wide response, 72 hours before they can concentrate sufficient force for what they're planning." 72 hours. Harrison looked out at the magnificent vista of Nexus Station, knowing he was seeing the last moments of a galactic order that had existed for millennia. "Director," Harrison said quietly, "are we ready for what comes next?" The pause that followed carried the weight of decisions that would reshape the galaxy itself. Choices that would either elevate humanity to their rightful place among the stars or condemn them to extinction alongside the civilizations they had tried to protect. "Ambassador," Director Mills replied, her voice carrying implications that reached across interstellar distances. "Project Testament was always designed for this moment. The question isn't whether we're ready, it's whether the galaxy can survive what we're about to become." Harrison nodded, feeling the weight of inevitability settling around him like armor. When the Malturi made their final move, his role as humanity's diplomatic voice would end in violence that would eliminate any possibility of future negotiation. But his role as humanity's final gift to the galaxy would begin. "Director," Harrison said, his voice carrying the quiet authority of someone who understood exactly what they were choosing, "initiate Testament Protocol. All phases, all targets, maximum effect." "Confirmed, Ambassador. Testament Protocol is active." "May God forgive us all." Harrison closed the communication and prepared for what would either be the greatest triumph in human history or the final act of his species' existence. Either way, the mask was off. And tomorrow, the galaxy would discover what humanity looked like when they decided to save a civilization that had never learned to save itself. 47 hours later, Ambassador Harrison died screaming in the wreckage of Nexus Station, his body torn apart by Malatari security forces that had finally abandoned all pretense of diplomatic protocol. His last words, transmitted across every communication frequency in the galaxy, were simple. "Testament Protocol is active. Remember the Devourers. Remember what they forgot." 3 days later, every star in Malthathari space went dark. Not destroyed, consumed. Converted into energy that fed ancient technologies. Humanity had recovered from archives that predated galactic civilization. Technologies that turned the concentrated light of suns into weapons that could reach across the galaxy to protect civilizations that had forgotten how to protect themselves. The message that accompanied the darkness spread across every inhabited world in the galaxy, broadcast in every known language and several that had been lost for millennia. "This is humanity's gift to the galaxy. We are the children of the species that survived the Devourer's first assault. We are the inheritors of technologies they left behind when they realized that some civilizations cannot be consumed, only awakened. The age of empires that conquer through force is ending. The age of civilizations that survive through strength begins now. Welcome to the new galaxy. Try not to disappoint us. In the years that followed, historians would mark the Multatari extinction as the moment galactic civilization truly began. Not because humanity had destroyed an empire that had ruled through fear, but because they had demonstrated that some species remembered lessons that others had forgotten. The most important lesson of all, that civilizations which value peace must always be prepared for war. And when that preparation meets technologies that predate recorded history, the result is not conquest. The result is transformation. The galaxy would never be the same. Humanity had made certain of that. And in the deep archives hidden throughout human space, ancient technologies continued their patient work, building defenses against threats that slumbered between stars, waiting for the day when the devourers would return and discover that the galaxy they had abandoned had learned to fight back. Because humanity had never forgotten the most important truth about survival, that sometimes, the only way to preserve peace is to become so dangerous that no one dares threaten it. The stars belonged to those who remembered how to defend them. And humanity remembered everything.